And it is a pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Ms. Isapchuk. She's PhD in philology. Yuliia, have you already defended your thesis? Yuliia also is associate professor of the world literature and at the area of literature department at Yuliia National University. The scope of her research interests is modern German and Austrian literature, African literature, as well as theory of literature landscape. And today, Yuliia will speak about literature of the African continent in Ukrainian educational domain. Yuliia, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Svetlana, for having introduced me. And let me share my presentation. Let me share my screen. You're supposed to be able to see my screen now. Yes, we can. We can see it. So I'm presenting my educational or learning project, literature of the African continent and the Ukrainian educational landscape. This project is implemented in Chernihiv National University, in the Department of World University and Literature Theory. It is implemented as the learning course for the students of our university, and it has a combined format. What do I mean by that? I invite experts on African literature and people who are working on the topics that are related to it. It can be African music or African cinematography, and they record their lectures, video lectures. Then we upload them to our website, and students can watch them in a remote mode. On a monthly basis, there is one lecture added. And when the students have watched the lecture, I organize workshops for them. And this program that is titled African Literature Studies is the program that lasts 1 year. It started in October 2023, and the last events are planned to take place in November 2024. Our group of students who are interested in it comprises 10 participants. If we take at the gender principle, we have 8 girls and 2 boys. But if we look at what they're studying, these are people who are majoring in English language and English to Ukrainian translation, as well as students majoring in philology, in Ukrainian philology, and also 2 people who major in political analytics and international relationship. The main thing for me was for the students to independently and voluntarily to choose this discipline, and they are interested in the culture of the African continent. And they could subscribe and sign up on the website, and there was a questionnaire. I wanted to find out how they realized that they were interested in the African literature studies, and you can see their replies on the screen, the original version with the author's punctuation and spelling. And as you can see, part of the students were simply interested in learning something new. They enjoy reading literature from other countries. They enjoy history and culture of other regions. And part of the students were really interested in the African continent. And they wanted to also probably learn more about the experience of colonial experience in other part of the world and compare it to Ukrainian experience, because both can be considered as post-colonial countries. So this is what it looked like. And I'm extremely grateful to this program. And I would like to add a few words about my partner from the University of Indiana, Akin Adesokan. And as you can see, he is an expert in African literature, comparative literature, cinema, and media studies. And he also is a writer. And I'm especially grateful to him because he consulted me regarding certain matters and also shared the curriculum for introduction to the African literature. It was very interesting to compare what students read at the University of Indiana and what we could replicate in our case, because the University of Indiana has a program dedicated to the African students, where students have an opportunity to not only study literature, but also certain African languages, history, and culture.
Дуже гарна комплексна програма. І тепер стосовно,
And
власне,
now let's talk about the African literature studies in particular. I will introduce to you the lecturers who are delivering these lectures, and I will give you an outline of their lectures. Since we are talking about African literature studies, it was of great importance to me for the students who are taking part in this course not to be simply able to discuss the texts, but also to use the cutting edge and the most up-to-date methods for analysis of the texts. That is why I have invited Alona Tichinina, who has a PhD in philology and who is an associate professor of the Department of Foreign Literature and Literary Theory at Yurkutkovich National University. Over here, you can see the main points that were discussed during the first lecture. Alona and I together discussed what would be of interest to our students, and these are the methods that could be used also further during the whole course. The first point, as you see, is methodology, as it is important to choose a specific method of analysis, as it defines the outcome of your analysis. And we also wanted to look at the method of biography and also the genre studies. Over here, we brought attention of our students to the concept that is promoted by Nona Kapustanska. And another item on our agenda was imagology, on the analysis of the text based on different images. So the image of an alien, the image of us, ethnic image. Another important aspect that we brought up was intertextuality, as it was very interesting to show whether there were any illusions and whether there were some reflections of the European literature found in African literature. Intermediality, you will see further on in my presentation that we will talk not only about literature, we will also talk about African cinema and music. Literary anthropology is another important technique that helps us helps everyday life habits and traditions. Hermeneutics is another technique that we offer to our students to analyze the text. Receptive poetics helps us understand better how we perceive the text as the perception of any literary piece depends greatly on the reader. Narratology, the theory of narration, This is the technique that helps us to see how the African texts are constructed from the point of view of the narration. Who is the narrator and what are the perspectives that are offered? Mythopoetics and the archetype criticism. In case of African literature, it is important for us to take a look at certain myths and certain stereotypes that are to be further debunked. Postcolonial criticism. Of course, if we're talking about African literature, it is next to impossible to discuss literary pieces of this continent without postcolonial criticism. Multiculturalism is another integral part of studies, as African writers often have hybrid identity, originating from Africa. Quite often, they live in Europe or the United States of America. Gender studies, feminist criticism help us to take a closer look at women's writing on the African continent. This was the first lecture that we held, and later on, based on this lecture, we held our first English workshop. This workshop was uh, titled How to Write About Africa of Binyawanga Wainaina. And there we discussed the multiple interpretations of the literary piece by the use of various methodological practices. Why I have selected this particular text? The reason for that is that it shows us how to write about Africa and how not to write about Africa. Our students, based on the knowledge that they already had, they were using the techniques like imagology, intertextuality, genre studies, hermeneutics, and postcolonial criticism. All these techniques were applied to this literary piece, and we were able to see what conclusions could we draw. Unfortunately, and public this piece is available only in the English version. There is an anonymous Ukrainian translation, and now we are preparing the official translation of this short story that is rather short, 3,000 characters, and there will be an official Ukrainian translation prepared by one of our students. I also added the intermediality component to it since there are small video clips that are accompanying this short story. As it was interesting to see how this text is perceived by the readers, what they pay attention to, and what is overlooked. The second lecture was dedicated to the English-speaking Nigerian literature, African trilogy of Chinua Achebe. Alyssa Staniuk delivered this lecture. Alyssa Staniuk is the PhD in philology, has PhD in philology, and she is a senior professor at the Department of Ukrainian and Foreign Languages at Ivan Pulu Ternopil National Technical University. Lesa Stanyuka is a pioneer when it comes to discovering and showing Ukrainian public the pieces by Chinua Achebe. In this lecture, we talked about colonization of African continent exemplified by Nigeria. As in this example could also be very relevant to other countries and other states on the African continent that used to be British colonies. During that lecture, we also discussed the English-speaking Nigerian literature and its early days in the first half of the 20th century. As in sub-Saharan Africa, this kind of literature emerged actually in 1920s, 1930s. Apart from that, during this lecture, we discussed the post-colonial novel as a genre. And we discussed particularly Nigerian novel. And later on, we discussed particularly Chinua Achebe as an important figure of African history and culture of the second half of the 20th century. The second lecture was also followed by the second in-class workshop that was dedicated to Chinua Achebe's novel No Longer at Ease in terms of colonialism context. This was the novel that was published in 1965, and it was already translated in Ukrainian. And there is another short story that is also translated, but that is it. We don't have any other literary pieces of Chinua Achebe available in Ukrainian. This novel shows us how the youth, while studying abroad, was longing for some changes, but the system was not ready to absorb these changes at that point in time. And the patriarch society was too conservative. This novel gives us some space for drawing a parallel with the situation in Ukraine in terms of post-colonialism, as the cross-cutting issues are corruption and red tape. And these are issues that we have in common with African countries and in the case of Ukraine. This is how we started talking about English-speaking literature in Africa. The third lecture was dedicated to French-speaking African literature. Senegal, the figure of Leopold Senghor. This lecture was delivered by Irina Satigo, who is the graduate of our department. She also has a PhD in philology. She is a literary scholar, and now she moved to France, and she is a translator. But she is still very much passionate about the literary heritage of Leopold Senghor. In 2015, Irina Satigo defended her thesis, and in 2018, she published a book on Leopold Senghor, which contains not only the information about Leopold Senghor, but also translations from French into Ukrainian. And later on, she uh, together with Olga Kutsenko, published translations of Leopold Senghor and his poems. Leopold Senghor is not just an outstanding writer, but he is an important historic figure. He was the first president of independent Senegal, and he was in power from 1960 to 1980 until the time when he resigned voluntarily. We discussed his figure as a writer. This lecture was dedicated to the West African literature, and we discussed particularly French-speaking literature and the experience of Senegal.
And also looked at the linguistics and philosophy notion of a linguistic and cultural union that comprises francophone countries of the world. And the second matter had to do with ethnical and philosophical conception of negritude, which is a very important concept for the French-speaking part of Africa, because it was also philosophical and ethnical paradigm that was popular in the 1930s, 1960s. It also evolved. It evolved starting with confrontation with the white colonizers, and then it comes to the ideas about mutual exchange, collaboration with the Western world. And the third question had to do with verse as a specific type of the artistic communication, because we know that there are two types. There is prose and there's poetry, and in this case, we're talking about verse as probably about the third type of communication. And Leopold Senghor writes lots of his poetry specifically using verse. And the fourth matter had to do with the art by Mr. Senghor as a very representative of the African region. Next, at a workshop that was titled "A Poet of Leopold Senghor in the Aspect of Negritude and Verse," we focused on analysis of the poetry by this author. The most well-known piece of poetry, his business card, if I may, can be considered Femme Noire. That was written in 1945, and you can take a look now at what verse looks like. This is something in between prose and poetry, where rhythm matters. It was published in the book Twilight, and he compiles French language and African rhythm, which also allows you to understand what negritude is as a psychology of an African inhabitant with black skin. And his texts also, when they were analyzed by the students, it was pretty difficult for them because it was very new to them. This was a new phenomenon to them, but it was interesting nevertheless. So these were 3 lectures and 3 workshops that took place in the first semester. Now we're talking about January. Currently, students are on their winter break, so they will have time to watch the lecture. And aside from taking a look at the French language and English language colonial tradition, we also wanted to take a look at the German colonial text in Africa, because Germany, for a short period of time, which lasted about 40 years, but still also was present in Africa. And this lecture was recorded by Bogdan Staroha, and it was titled "Das ist die weiche Birne," which can be translated as "This is an overly ripe pear." This is a quote from Gottfried Benn's poetry, who contemplates about the African continent. And we see that Africa can also, judging from the name of this lecture, can be also presented as the German colonial text. Bogdan Staroha majored in German studies, and now he's studying German colonial literature. He's associate professor at the department in Roman and German philology at Korolenko Poltava National Pedagogical University. And this lecture demonstrates, as you can see on your screens, a dream that existed in the German colonial world. The dream to spread and disseminate German ownership in the framework of the project that was called German Middle Africa, Deutsch Mittelafrika. And it is interesting that the German colonial experience also differs if we look at the intellectual perception. And even in modern text, this short stay of Germany in Africa is also present in the African literature. And this project was dedicated to making popular African literature among students. Nevertheless, we also wanted to somehow engage school students. And in January, we also organized a workshop for teenagers, for high schoolers, 9th through 11th grade, with a teacher of Chernivtsi Lyceum number 7, Dionysia Brzezinska, who also graduated from our university. She also attended a course in African literature back in the day. And for this workshop, I picked a book titled I Will Always Write Back, How One Letter Changed Lives of Two People. And this is a book that is based on a true story, letters between Caitlin, an American middle schooler, and Martin Ganda, a boy from Zimbabwe. This letter exchange was happening in 1997 through 2003. And this is an epistolary genre that demonstrates to us how Africans are perceived in the Western world. And what is interesting about this book? It can be looked at in the aspect of the motivational literature for teenagers, because this letter exchange changed life both for Martin, and now he is in his 40s, and he is a successful man. He immigrated to the United States, he obtained good education, and he can help his family. So he didn't lose an opportunity. And Caitlin is an American girl. She also looked at her life from a different angle and also started to cherish what she has. And the text is very simple, very easy to read and to understand. And I think we're gonna have this workshop pretty soon in the end of January, and we'll see what the results will be like. The second term, February through June, there will be a number of lectures. In February, we'll talk about cinematography. There will be a lecture dedicated to African cinematography and to the figure of Semben Osman. Semben Osman often is called the father of the African black and white cinematography. It is important to mention that he's both a writer and a director, because he realized to reach out to African people, he has to adapt his texts and turn them into movies. And the lecture will be by Ms. Nika Rack, who is an expert on movie scripts, and now she is writing her thesis dedicated to this topic. And during the workshop, we will watch 2 short films, and we will read the text. And the post scale, and we will try to see at how the text can be transformed into a film adaptation. In March, Francophone literature of Maghreb, Algeria. We're going to look at that region in Africa. And the lecture will be by Ms. Hachaska, who represents Berlin National University, named after Lessa Franco. And she teaches at the Department of Roman Philology and Translation, and her department collaborates with one of the Algerian universities. And workshop will be dedicated to the small prose, female prose of the Algerian Francophone literature. We're going to take a look at the post-colonial and multicultural aspects. April comes next. Modern Arab language poetry and North African music. The lecturer will be Mr. Rubalking, who defended his thesis about the modern Arab language poetry in Maghreb, and he represents Kiev National Linguistic University. Again, in the workshop, we will speak both about the literature and poetry, Arab language poetry. We'll try to compare American and Ukrainian hip-hop music, both the form and the content. We'll talk about the English language literature in South African Republic. We're going to take a look at the works by Mr. Kudze. The lecture will be by Ms. Pshenichna from Karazin Kharkiv National University. And in 2016, she defended her thesis dedicated to Kudze's artwork. And during the workshop, we will take a closer look at the novel by this author in the context of post-apartheid. And it is titled Dishonor. And also, after that, the next one in June will be a lecture about the image of Africa in commercials. The lecture will be by Ms. Sajana from Yurifitkovich National University. She's my colleague. And the last workshop will be dedicated to the imagological vectors of studying African literature. And we will look at the collection of poetry by Kaisa Dra, which represents different African poets, as well as Ukrainian authors expressing their thoughts about African literature. And also we will read the book Gawan by Mr. Kapuscinski, a Polish author who traveled across the African continent for quite some time. And this also shows Africa from a different angle. And in July, we will sum up this course, and the participants will be presenting their group art projects. So this is what our curriculum looks like. And after each workshop, I surveyed students. I asked them to provide feedback, and here you can see some of their impressions from the African literature studies. What impressed them the most after the first 3 lectures and first 3 workshops. It was interesting for them to analyze these texts on the basis of a peculiar methodology. They also managed to look at the African literature from a different angle. Some discovered it. And they have learned something from literature of different parts of Africa. And I would like to add before I end my presentation that when sometimes I'm asked what kind of lectures do I do when it comes to literature. For example, once my grandma asked me, she asked me, what are you reading? And I told her that I'm reading to prepare for the course on African literature. And the granny asked me, is there literature in Africa? And also, one of the close people, also when I told them about what I'm reading, also shyly said that they were not aware about the African literature. And the mini goal of my project, that there is no literature in Africa, is the thought that should be exterminated, because African literature is unbelievably interesting. It's very diverse. It is represented by 5 Nobel Prize winners in literature. And here you can see a few pictures on the slide. We are organizing these workshops in our conference room at the international department. And I was really glad that in one of the walls, on one of the walls where you can see the world map, there was a phrase by Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is a renowned personality, and he's also representative of the African continent. And it said that education is the most powerful weapon that can be used to change the world. And I hope that each of us here, representatives of various education institutions who are presenting their projects, that we, with the help of education, with the help of communication with the younger generation, will be capable to change the world for the better. We'll be able to change our difficult situation in Ukraine. Thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions or listen to your comments.
Щиро дякуємо, пані Юлія. Я особисто
Thank you
хочу
very much, Yulia. I personally want to express my awe for your project. It is incredibly fascinating, very instructive, and simply incredible. I wish you all the best of luck in your endeavors and your research. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions? Angela, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Yulia. Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask the following. How is that project of yours integrated into the national curriculum? How are you inviting the participants into your project? Are you taking any assessment to measure the outcome of your project at the end? To answer that question, I should say the following, that this project is outside the national curriculum. This is a more after class activity. At the end of this course, we will give certificates and it will give the participants one credit within the European credit system. I was inviting students via social networks and also via students' organizations. I also let faculty know, and students volunteered to take part in this project. For some of these students, I used to teach at the first year of their studies. Some of them were new. But these are the students from some particular department, or are they from different departments? Well, we have 6 students from the Department of Foreign Languages, philology, English, Ukrainian translation, Ukrainian philology. 3 students are from Ukrainian philology, and one student is majoring in archaeology, and another one in international affairs. We are holding these lectures as after-class activity, and we are meeting on Thursdays in the afternoon. We are meeting once a month, and I do not think that that is very difficult to meet. Is it all online? Well, and the lectures are held online, but the workshops are in-class workshops. For me, it was important to arrange the opportunity for them to exchange in person.
Пані Оксано, будь ласка.
Oksana, please go ahead. Thank you, Yulia, for your extremely fascinating presentation, and I would like to thank you for the way you are teaching literature in the global context. While listening to your presentation, I was reminiscing about the way I discovered African cinema. A couple years ago, I was going through magazines and I came across an article about African cinema. You said that this training course is for them, for the students to grow, but this is just for their curiosity, for their personal development. But what is their motivation? Do they want to go to Africa and to explore the continent? Thank you for that question. When we distributed the questionnaires before the course, I was also wondering about their motivation. Some of them were simply interested in discovering new continent, new literature, new cultures. Some of them wanted to draw a parallel between post-colonial experience of Africa and Ukrainian post-colonial experience. Some were interested more in North African literature, English language or French language, Maghreb literature. And of course, not all of them show up on a regular basis, but at least 5 and 6 of them show up and discuss literature. They express their opinions, and I think that they are internally motivated.
Дуже дякую. Чудово.
Thank
Шановні
you.
колеги, є ще якісь коментарі, запитання до пані Юлії?
Do we have any other
Пані Олена, будь
questions?
ласка.
Elena, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. Atkins hand was up.
Okay. Your turn,
О,
please.
я перепрошую. Так, ага, прошу.
I'm sorry, I get it. Oh, all right, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, can you hear me? Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Yuliia. It's very comprehensive and extremely well planned, and so quite very easy also to follow. And really impressed with the range of references and the scope of the work that you've put together. And I hope that your audiences, both online and in person, benefit from this. It's very, very good. Excuse me. I just have a general comment and then a question. The comment has to do with the outline that you showed at the beginning about the different categories that you wanted to use to pass this information across. You did mention the question of gender, and I was listening for that, and so I just will suggest as much as possible that, especially in terms of the work that have been written, that have been produced, because in the past 10 years, there have been a great deal of work, especially by female African writers. Most of them perhaps are not translated, maybe not easily accessible, but that's an area to really focus on. There, both of them are those who live on the continent and those live in the United States and UK. It's an explosion in African literature, and so that's it. And it also ties in with cinema, a lot of which is now available online through streaming platforms like Prime Video and Netflix. Very interesting new films by young African female filmmakers. So that's so I will suggest that if possible, because you already have a lot of riches already, there's a lot that you have in this work. But if there's room for that, I think that's an area that I would suggest that you bring more material in. And so that's the comment aspect. The question is really very brief and has to do with the piece by Binyavanga Wainaina, which you said that's the how to write about Africa. And stylistically, or even generically, it's a work of satire. So I was just wanted to get your sense of how your students responded to these, introducing such a very sensitive scope, sensitive subject to a new audience in Ukraine through a genre that is really like not that's very ironic. It's not it's not direct, it's not matter of fact. It is generically, it's a satire. So I'm just wondering, what was the response? Did people take him literally, or did they understand this as satire? So thank you. That's my question.
Дуже дякую за поради.
Thank you very
Якщо,
much for your advice.
якщо говорити про ось цей
Well, speaking about gender studies and gender principle, we do not have many publications available in translation into Ukrainian, and that is why I trying to balance it out in our project to have the female lecturers and to have certain texts and certain videos that are available in the Ukrainian language. That was the issue. Thank you for your comment. I will take that into consideration. I do understand that African cinema and African women's writing is very broad in scope and very prolific. With regard to this short story, how to write about Africa, my students at the beginning thought that this would be the text with advice on how to write, but when they read the text, they realized that this was irony and satire, as there were many stereotypes about Africa. For instance, that Africans are eating monkey brains, that Africans are all poor and unhappy, miserable. And if there are some well-to-do Africans, there are very few of them, and they are all fat and ugly and bad people. Yes, we wanted to show them that there are these stereotypes, and we wanted to dismantle these stereotypes. African continent is very far from us, from point of view of distance, and for them it was a great discovery. That is why I have picked that particular text, that particular short story as the beginning. And then step by step, we were dismantling these stereotypes, debunking the myths, as there is this image of Africans in mass literature and in African literature. That are two different images. Thank you, Yuliia. Dear colleagues, anyone else? Alena? Thank you. I wanted to echo what Yuliia has said. Yuliia is a colleague of mine. I'm also a literary scholar, and yes, indeed, African literature is not well discovered for us, and yes, this is the multicultural aspect. This project is very important from the point of view of discovering new culture, new traditions. I remember that when we started studying American literature, and 20 years ago in Kiev, together with Tatiana Naumova Denisova, who was a volunteer as you today, she was uniting both thinkers who wanted to speak about American literature, Black literature, Jewish literature, etc. But there were no translations. She started reading those texts. She was forcing us to read these texts, and we were selected as the topics for thesis to be defended. And I do understand why Angela asked this question, and it makes sense. How could that information be used practically, and how could that become part of curriculum? Well, I believe that not everyone can read in English, but anyway, there might be people who wanted to learn more, and it could be an optional course for people who want to join you and who want to learn more about cinema and the African literature. This is how we introduced American literature. It was an optional course. As you, I was looking for students, but now I don't need to do that anymore. They come to me and they reach out themselves. When we were talking about Hemingway and Fitzgerald back in the days, and now we have a long list that is the list to read. Greetings to Alessa Stanyuk. We were defending with this on the same day. Give my best to her. I don't have questions to you. I just wanted to tell you that you can find the books, you can find the translations, Ukrainian translations that could be used. And you know that some of these texts from African literature were awarded with the Booker Prize, and I'm sure that they are available in English. Looking forward to your course, and it's great that you were able to unite so many scholars from all over Ukraine. That is quite a success. Thank you. Hopefully, I will be able to join your course one day, and maybe I will even invite my students. That would be great if we could all do that together. Thank you.
Прекрасні коментарі. Дуже
Amazing commentary. Thank you so much, Olena. And it is amazing that we're building such a community around your project, Yuliia. Are there any more questions or maybe some more comments? Yuliia, if I may, I would like to also ask a question. I wanted to ask, are you planning to continue this project? If yes, then how? And looking at it from the interdisciplinary angle, maybe you would like to engage anthropologists, historians, etc., to broaden African studies in general. And one more question. You have righteously mentioned African studies, the Faculty of African Studies at the University of Indiana, and we have multiple languages, Swahili, Yoruba, Zulu are being taught here. And in your project, you have mostly represented French language, English language, and Arab language literature. Are you planning to also take a look at other languages that were used for literary works, and how do you want to present it? And one more question. Is your project unique, or are you planning to collaborate with other teachers and professors from other universities? Thank you, Svetlana. Well, in the future, yes, I would like to engage other experts if we're talking about interdisciplinarity. So I have to look for historians, as you have mentioned, because, yeah. Speaking about experts in literature and African studies, there are quite a few. You saw all that I have managed to find. So yeah, we have to find or maybe engage people who could discover and explore this continent, the same as I did with cinematography and commercials. And regarding literature that was written in colonial languages, it is, again, boils down to translation issue, because sadly we do not have Ukrainian translation of Yoruba, Kikuyu, or Swahili translations, and we do not have experts who would be able to provide this kind of translation. So it is difficult to do that. So this is an open question. We probably have to do that all via English language, engage some other sources, but for now we do not have experts. So this is the challenge. Because in school, if we take Ukrainian school, I checked curriculum, the new Ukrainian school, African literature The only thing is that mentioned in this context is Egyptian myth. And if we take Ukrainian higher education, I see that in some of the learning programs, if we're talking about modern world literature, yes, you see at least one topic dedicated, Cheba, Avdim Gardiner. So some well-known representatives could say too. If we're talking about Arab language literature, this also is looked at as a separate unit. There are also some learning programs. And if we're talking about autochthonous literature that was written in those languages, well, we're looking forward to the translations into the experts. The problem, this is basically what creates the challenge. Thank you so much, Yuliia. I think that this is a very good comment, that you have to engage people who speak in English language, and I'm pretty sure that maybe your colleague, Mr. Aiken Adesokan, could also give a lecture. Colleagues, thank you so much for such an interesting and fruitful discussion. Thank you, Yuliia, for such an inspirational presentation. Thank you all. And once again, I'd like to thank all those who have joined us today, despite all the sad news that are coming from Ukraine today. We have to stay united, donate to the armed forces of Ukraine, support one another, and keep in touch as much as possible. Thank you all. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Thank you.